then we will really get started, and we will hopefully share some information that will be useful to you as you're working with volunteers in your different agencies. So I will start. I'm Joyce Thomas-Vinson, coordinator for AuburnServes, and I am excited that you all are here, and I can't wait to hear all of your good information. Okay? So, Elise, tell everyone who you are. Elise Scott.
Hey, my name is Elise Scott. I'm the Director of Collegiate Outreach Programs for the Carey Center for the Advancement of Plant and Piano Studies.
I'm Ashley Hansana. I'm the Volunteer Coordinator for the Auburn Area Community Theater.
I'm Stephanie Catlett with the Southeastern Raptor Center. I'm the Rehabilitation Specialist there at Auburn University's College of Engineering.
I'm Erin Simon. I work at Auburn University, but I'm really here on behalf of Opelika Rotary's Happy Hour Division.
On behalf of, say that again.
Opelika Rotary's Happy Hour Division.
Happy Hour Division. Now you know I can't let that pass because I know it's not what it sounds like, right?
We have a Twitter page.
Okay.
And I'm Reverend Dr. Anna Cruz Camp House. I'm pastor of 3 little churches in Lee and Macon County and also on staff of the Wesley Foundation. And I train student pastors how to be pastors before they go to seminary. But on the side, when I'm not doing that, I also am working on developing a project that I'm calling Abundant Life. It targets people that are in rural areas of Lee and Macon County to help work on issues of wellness for people that are socioeconomically challenged.
Wow.
So I'm building that.
Wonderful.
And I have 3 kids. I'm the pastor of Michael Gratian at Memphis Church.
Wow. Do you have time to breathe? You just keep running. You just take off.
But, yeah.
Well, we're happy to have you here today.
I'm Jackie Moffitt, Volunteer Coordinator with Lee County Humane Society.
I'm Adam Greer. I work for the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at Auburn.
Okay.
Go back and catch up. You go ahead.
Ralph, they want you to introduce yourself.
I'm Ralph Foster. I work with Joyce at the Office of Public Service at Auburn.
Sharon Wilbanks, I'm the Director of the Auburn University Early Learning Center. I'm also here on behalf of Allen Memorial Ministries, where I sit on the board.
Oh, okay.
I am Mary Beth Montgomery, and I am a student at Auburn University.
Okay. And Mary Beth Montgomery, what are you majoring in? What brings you here today?
Human Development and Family Studies, and then my minor is Nonprofit and Philanthropy Studies.
Oh, okay. So that's what brings you here today. Well, very good. We are excited to have you. Excited to have everyone. And I will try not to talk too long because we don't have but so much time. But this is an area that I'm very interested in. So when you're excited about something and you talk a lot anyway, you can really go overboard. But that's why I have Janie, who is going to keep me on track. Everybody needs a Janie. Do you have a Janie who keeps you on track? Yes, and she does it and never stops smiling. Okay, but I want to start with sharing a story with you. 2010, I started working with a group of students called Campus Kitchens. When I started working with that group, I went back and checked. There were 14 students, and they had a mission to take wasted food and get it to people who were in need of food. A good marriage, right? At that time, like I said, 14 students. We had a shift on Tuesday afternoons where a portion of that 14 would go to the athletic department, to one of their kitchens, and get some food that was left over from that serving for the day. On Wednesday, they would get the food to see, this is what we have and this is what we're missing in order to make a complete meal, because they always wanted it nutritionally balanced. On Thursday, me and one of the students would go shopping at Walmart. So every Thursday afternoon, as part of my job, I actually got to go to Walmart. And we would shop to get food that would make up that meal. And then on Friday morning, we would go to the Wesley Foundation and serve hot meals, yes, to 72 people. 14 students, and we served 72 people per week. Today, we have 40 different shifts per week. We have more than 90 student volunteers per week. We serve as many as 1,000 meals per week. And it is all dependent on student volunteers. One thing I've learned for sure in working with them is that people are inspired by the possibilities that they can have when it comes to helping others. How many of you are totally dependent? Is anybody totally dependent on volunteers for your agency? Not totally dependent. So you don't have to have 90 different volunteers every week on 40 shifts. How many of you have volunteers as an integral part of your services? Just about everybody else, right? In the nonprofit world, volunteers, that's how we make it. Because we are on very limited budgets. We have very limited staffs. And so the volunteers become a critical part of what we do. So I want to spend a little time talking about volunteers and how to build your volunteer force and how to strengthen your volunteer force. And I'm looking at it from 3 different areas: recruitment, daily operations, and then opportunities for leadership. And I will say, I want to differentiate before we really get started. What I'm talking about today is more in terms of building a long-term relationship with your volunteers. Sometimes you don't need a long-term relationship. I'm well aware of that. Sometimes you need warm bodies. If you're trying to paint a large facility and you need it done today, you don't need a long-term relationship. You need somebody with a paintbrush paint. Okay, so I fully understand that sometimes you just need people for the day. Jean Dean, Kathy isn't here, but I know on days when she's trying to label 4,000 to 5,000 books, she doesn't need a long-term relationship. She needs 50, 60 volunteers who can get those books labeled and packaged and out to the facilities that use them. So I realize that sometimes you just need the warm bodies. But today my focus is more on building long-term relationships. Why would that matter? Anybody?
To grow your organization?
Yeah, absolutely, to grow your organization. Absolutely. How much time does it take to train somebody? A long time. I mean a really long time. So when you can get a volunteer who is long-term, you're getting more back on your investment of time, right? It takes a long time. It takes as much time to train them if they're only going to stay there for a week as it would if they were going to stay there for a year. So if you can get them to stay longer, then you're getting more out of your investment. And you are building that organization, because the longer they are there, the more integral their role becomes with your organization, and the greater impact they can have. So I'm really trying to focus on getting those volunteers and getting them to stay in your agency. All right, so I was about to say, what you do with my thing, Jamie? Now after I got you to get it, I can. All right. So as I said earlier, I wanted to look at 3 areas: recruitment, daily operations, and leadership opportunities. Okay? So let's start with recruitment. First thing when it comes to engaging volunteers and getting good volunteers in your agency is recruitment. And I just have to be really honest and say that everybody in your agency should recruit the volunteers. Can I say that? Okay, because I can't put it back in, it's all down. Everybody can't recruit the volunteers. The person who recruits the volunteers needs to be the outgoing people person who can make people feel good, who can have a good relationship with people almost instantly. People who have that charisma. You know people like that in the organization? Who come in and they can tell you it's storming and they can make it sound good. Man, it's storming. You need that person who is excited and passionate about what you do. I cannot come in here and convince people to do something that I don't believe in myself. And people can see through that. So you need to identify the correct recruiter when you're trying to get volunteers. Somebody who's going to reach out to people, who's going to have a good impact, who's going to make people feel good about the possibilities. And this is one thing that, quite frankly, a volunteer who has been with your agency for an extended amount of time would be ideal. Regardless of all of the different methods we use for recruiting, you know what the very best method of recruiting is? You can cheat, it's on the answer sheet. Word of mouth. So if you've got a volunteer who's been with your agency for an extended amount of time, chances are they've had a good relationship, a good experience, or they wouldn't be there still. So those volunteers may be really good to recruit other volunteers. When they've had a good, positive experience with your organization, they can go out and tell someone. I worked with Project Uplift for 10 years. I recruited volunteers to work with at-risk children in Lee County. I went out on the concourse repeatedly looking for any student that I could stop, slow down, trip up, you know, whatever it took to get them to stop, okay. And one day I took my assistant with me, who was a volunteer. It was like I had just struck gold or something. She saw all her buddies come across the concourse. They were waving and smiling. Hey girl, what you doing? Oh, come on, let me tell you about it. After that particular session on the concourse, in the next training session for volunteers, our attendance increased from 10 people to 60. My supervisor came back and said, Joyce, what did you do? I was like, hey, I'm just good like that. But I had a volunteer with me, one that the students knew and they could relate to. But she was also very involved in Project Uplift, believed in what we were doing, had a great relationship with the child she was mentoring, so she was the perfect person to help me recruit. So remember that. When you get out there, when you send somebody out there, whoever that volunteer is seeing that you're sending out there, for all, they know that person is your organization. So they need to see someone who is excited, who is passionate, who believes in the mission. Not desperate. Desperation runs them away. Okay, so you don't want anybody who appears desperate, even though you may think, man, I gotta have some volunteers. Send the person out there who's not gonna look like they have these volunteers. Okay, but someone who's gonna be all excited. So get that right, get the right recruiter. That is critical. The next thing you wanna do is clearly express what it is they're gonna be doing. As I said earlier, people are inspired and motivated by the possibilities. They want to know you can make a life-altering difference to a child if you are their big brother or big sister. You can change the trajectory of a child's life if you help them learn to read early, because it sets them up for success in school and subsequently in life. People want to see those possibilities. And so you want to think about that when you're saying, what is it the volunteer is going to do? You want to establish a clear, almost job description for the volunteer. What are you going to do, and how is it going to make a difference to the people that you're serving? Okay? So you want to get the best recruiter, express what they're going to be doing in a way that shows them their possibilities. Okay? You also want to make sure that volunteers know what's in it for me. You know, we're still in that world, right? People want to know what's in it for me. Why would I come and spend all my spare time helping you? I could be out watching TV with my buddies. I could be at a party over there on the fraternity row. The students want to know what's in it for me. So again, going back to that job description, what's in it for me, let them know about those possibilities. One of the things that I wanted to share with you, went the wrong way. One of the things I wanted to share with you was some reasons why people volunteer. So you want to appeal to these reasons when you're out recruiting people. External forces is 10, and the list is going in reverse order. So, and this is from a survey of people who volunteer. And when we say external forces, that means they saw your flyer, or they heard you speak at the club meeting, or they attended one of your events or something. So something external said, caught their eye, and they decided to come in. All right? So bad news is all of the things that we spend so much time on, that's really not what brings people in the doors, but we have to do it anyway, right? We have to create that awareness. Boredom. Sometimes people are just looking for something to do. My friend was going to the training for Project Uplift, so I'm going with them. Have nothing else to do. Sometimes it's guilt. Ever did anything out of guilt? Anybody? No? You all are some special people. Man, and I've done so many things out of guilt. My mom used to guilt me to death. I mean, I'd just be like, okay, Mom, sign me up. I'm going. But there are people, we're like that in life. Sometimes you see, man, I'm blessed, I'm fortunate not to be in that situation. I just feel so badly for the kids. I just gotta go on the go. So, guilt. But if you're trying to get a volunteer, don't be beyond playing on that guilt. If you know these are some people who are affluent in a good situation, and they think, man, I feel bad for the kids who are struggling, come on and help us in it. Okay. Need that experience. A lot of times with students, they need that experience. They're going to be a teacher, they need some experience working with young people. Okay? They're in a nonprofit minor or major, and they need some experience working hands-on with the nonprofit organization. So again, what's in it for me? Let the students know this is a great opportunity for you to get some valuable experience. This is an opportunity for you to take what you're learning in those books and apply it in a real-world situation. Okay? Let them know what's in it for them. They see a social need. They see a need. They're watching TV. They are hearing all of the headlines. They're seeing all the horror stories about what's going on with kids. They want to make a difference. They see that need. Okay? So sometimes you have to appeal to that. Spiritual reasons. Some people feel like it is their responsibility, based on their faith, to give back. Let people know this is your opportunity to give back. And you may be in some settings where you want to go a little harder and say not only is it your opportunity, this is your responsibility to give back, depending on the audience you're speaking to. Okay? The younger people don't want to hear this is your responsibility. But when you start dealing with an older clientele, you know, when you tell us it's our responsibility, we're thinking, yeah, you're right. I'll be there. I'm on my way. Okay. Gratitude. Ever done anything because you were so grateful, just thankful? I have. I must be an all-day sucker, huh? But anyway, gratitude. If you're grateful, thankful, you're thinking, how can I reach out and help someone else? Okay, so if you're in again, that may be a particular environment, but if that's what your audience, what your potential volunteer is needing, you can play on that. Personal connections. I'm working with the Breast Cancer Foundation because I had an aunt who died of breast cancer. Or I went back to speak at Head Start because my mom taught at Head Start for 17 years, and she really did. Okay, personal connection. And sometimes in your audiences, you may be in a position where you're speaking to a support group or people who have some connection to the organization. You definitely want to play on those connections. They see a compelling need, sort of like the social need, right? I see that there was a great need, and we see this often when we have a natural disaster. You see the compelling need. You see all the homes that have been destroyed. you see all the people who are homeless and don't know how they're gonna rebuild and start again. And so you are compelled to get involved, okay? And then people, the number one reason, went back to our cheat sheet from earlier, was a personal invitation, word of mouth. Somebody asked me, will you help? Come go with me. This was a great relationship for me, okay? So when you are crafting that message for your volunteers and tell them what's in it, remember those are the 10 most popular reasons people give for why they volunteer, okay? Simplify sign up. One thing that became an issue before I left Project Uplift was it had become more and more complicated to get a volunteer in the door. Now, nothing against Project Uplift. I love it still. I love everything about it. But because of the world as we know it, everybody now has to have a driving, they have to check your background in driving. Have you had some accidents? Because you don't want to put your children in the hands of someone who is a reckless driver and proving it. Okay? They have to do background checks because you don't want to turn a child over to the hands of some pedophile. I actually had to learn to fingerprint people because we had to do background checks on everybody and to keep the expense down. I had to learn to fingerprint them myself and send those in. And like I said, that couldn't be avoided, and I know in some of your organizations, those things are absolutely required. But as much as you can, and where you can, simplify the sign-up process. Don't make it so complicated that they don't know what to do. One of the things that helps us at Campus Kitchens is the fact that our volunteers can go online to our volunteer hub, and they can see the shifts that are available for the week. They can see how many people are needed for each shift. They can sign up for the shift right there on the spot. Okay? So the more you can simplify it, the better. And then, as I've said before, recruitment is still, the strongest recruitment is still by word of mouth. Okay. So, any questions on recruitment? Get your outgoing person out there. Make sure they're telling the people what they're gonna be doing. Make sure they're appealing to the people. How is this gonna satisfy my needs, or what's in this for me? Make certain that once you capture their attention, you make it easy for them to become a part of your organization. And then they're gonna run tell somebody else, which we ultimately want them to do. Everybody's real quiet. You still with me? Okay. All right. Anybody have any great recruitment tips that you want to share? I know a lot of us in here have been doing this kind of thing for a while. Anybody have any great success story? Sharon, you just smiling. Nobody? Okay. All right.
I think our success is, we're fortunate to have a university in the town.
Mm-hmm.
When you're nonprofit and you have a university, because we do get a lot of students. One of the things that we do run into if we're trying to recruit volunteers is it's expensive for us, because we do have to have DHR and federal regulations say that we have to have all those background checks and things.
You have to, do you all still do the CAN reports as well?
Do what now?
CAN.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't think so, but
Okay.
I do know that we have to have all of that volunteer information on file, and it's expensive. Now, fortunately for us now, they can go online and do all of it. But the reason I was speaking of the university is because we have an agreement with the university for most of your kinesiology team, and we use the psychology team, Dr. Shapiro and things of that nature. So those students have already, we know that they've already had to, if they were in their human development or education, they've already had all that. So we don't have to go back and ask for that again.
Right. And that is wonderful, Sharon. I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that can help you in your recruitment is if you can identify either a department or particular faculty member who has a heart for what you're doing, and develop that partnership with them, it can be very helpful for recruiting and for maintaining a steady stream of students. One thing when we first got started with Campus Kitchens, we appealed to human sciences repeatedly to get those students. And we would go into the classrooms, and as a matter of fact, the students still do that some. But we'll go into the classrooms and speak to a class and tell them about that mission and get students to come in. So, see, you had the right answer for me. But that is a great way to do some recruiting. Yes.
This may go without saying, but, I was reading ahead on your slideshow. I might have missed it, but I didn't see it. One of the things that's really important in terms of volunteer management or fundraising efforts is this combination of respect and appreciation.
Absolutely.
So some of the ways that you respect people you have already said, such as delineating exactly what they're doing, so that they're not going, and how long, Sometimes, especially in the church, you'll get people like, I don't wanna sign up because I don't wanna die doing it. So there's that. And then, especially in the little smaller churches,
Right.
I'm like, well, nobody else. So there's that. And then it's appreciation. Thank you notes. Handwritten thank you notes go a very, very long way. And if you never say thank you, if you never write a thank you, never give a public acknowledgement of what people are doing, these kinds of things, you will lose people because they will serve with you, and even if they had a lot out of it, they'll be like, but they didn't really care if I was there or not.
That is a great point. And I addressed it a little bit, when I started talking, recognizing volunteer contributions, but that is one of the things. I think it may have been you, Janie, that I was talking to recently, and I said, thank you, a well-placed thank you is my secret weapon. When I need people to do things, and when they have done things for me, it is always a thank you. And then even though many people will say to you, I don't want any public acknowledgement, they really appreciate the public acknowledgement. Yeah.
Well, not all. If somebody
This is
gives you,
true.
if somebody gives you $50,000 and says, I wanna remain anonymous, you let them remain anonymous.
Absolutely.
They will never give you a dime after that.
This is true. This is true. I had one of those in my church yesterday. He always supports our Thanksgiving. We feed everybody who needs a Thanksgiving meal, and he always supports it financially. And he always says, no, you don't have to mention me. And that is the one time I don't mention him.
But there is one exception to that
What
rule.
was that?
If you talk to people who give that amount of money and you're doing like a capital campaign or something, and you talk to them about, if we could tell people that you're behind it, like that you have given this, it might inspire other people to give, that's different. But like, if it's just a one-time thing and it's not part of something else, then yeah, just let it be.
Absolutely. Very good, very, very good. Thank you all so much for that input, and I want some of you others who've been quiet, I will call on you a little bit later, okay? All right, thank you. All right, so when it comes to engaging volunteers in daily interactions, once you get someone in the door, you convince them that you have a great mission, you convince them that they are the ideal person to help you reach that mission. So once you get them in there, how do you keep them in there? You want to, first of all, provide a culture that welcomes volunteers. And I can't say that loudly enough. I will be very honest and say there are some agencies, sometimes I wonder how they keep people in because their culture does not say, I appreciate you being here. When a volunteer comes into your agency, as Reverend, is it Culver House? Camp House, I changed your name, I'm sorry, Camp House. As she was just saying, you wanna let them know, we appreciate what you are doing. I realize there are 1,001 things that you could be doing today. I appreciate what you're doing. That's part of the welcoming culture. Another part of that welcoming culture is having space, resources, information, whatever it is they need to get their job done, having it available for them says we appreciate you. The last thing you want to do as a volunteer is bring them in and then make them feel like they are an inconvenience because they are not coming back. And worse still, they're gonna tell their friend, don't go over there, fool with those people. Those some nasty people. Those some disorganized people. They don't know what they're doing. You don't want that. Cause their friend is gonna tell another friend. It doesn't stay right there. So you wanna create that welcoming culture. Make sure they're appreciated. Make sure they have what they need. Make sure they know what it is they're supposed to do. Again, standing around, not having any direction. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know why I'm here. I don't think I'm needed. I'm gonna catch the first exit out when I get a chance. That happens. I've been to a volunteer situation where I felt that way and I'm thinking, as soon as I catch it out, I'm gonna jump out that door. All right, so again, coming back to the same type of personality that you have out there recruiting, that volunteer coordinator or the person who's in charge of communicating with their volunteers, with your volunteers, need to have those same types of skills, need to have those people skills, needs to be passionate and excited, needs to have some degree of organization so that you can tell the volunteers what they need to do and this is how you need to do it and these are the tools that you need to get the job done. Yes.
How do you recommend, because in my situation, our agency is so big that I don't always know who's at what center
Right.
or have they had a good experience. Now, I've thought about doing like some like volunteer surveys, like to get a little bit of feedback. Is that one of the ways that you'd recommend doing that? If you can't be everywhere? Because
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know you can't be everywhere, but that's why it's even more important that everywhere volunteers would be, that you have someone on the ground who is basically speaking for you. And it is that person who is good with people and who can communicate and who can make sure that volunteers know what they're supposed to do. But anytime you can get feedback, and if you can do it by a survey, that would be a good thing. Because if something is going on that you may not even know about, then you can't fix it.
Right, and not only that, if they like for me to go out and recruit and speak about the agency and Head Start, but if someone's had an experience and then I didn't know about it, sometimes it can be somewhat of an embarrassment. And I know where my strong people are, like I know that at Shelton Mill Road, I know the people that are there, so I know those are good, strong people, but then I may not always know what goes on, like in Hurtsboro, because I certainly can't be down there.
Right.
And also at Darden is so big, some people do have, based on what classroom they go in, that teacher may not have felt good that day, or they may have had a horrible experience, kids may have went crazy.
Right.
So, and there's one me. And so I was just wondering, do you recommend
Yeah,
a survey?
I do recommend the surveys, and like I said, in as much as possible. And yours is a different situation, because like you said, anytime a student goes into a classroom, or a volunteer goes into a classroom, there's always a possibility for a bad experience. And some of it can't be controlled. Because when a child is going through or acting out because of something that happened at home before they got there, that could impact the volunteer's experience. And you can't control that.
Right.
But it is something that, with Project Uplift, we dealt with a similar thing, where you could not control everything that happened. But what we tried to do is always let people know in advance, these are some of the things that could potentially happen. And this is how you should respond to them. And during the training, we would tell them more of the horror stories just to let them know this could possibly happen. Now, chances are it wasn't going to happen. And so then they would go out and have a great relationship with their child, and they would come back and say, oh, wow, this is wonderful, this is great. Because it was so much better, because none of the negative things happened. Right, yeah. But you don't want them going in thinking this is gonna be wonderful, and they start dealing with a child who's been neglected and abused, and that child starts acting out. Because that is unfortunately one of the realities that we have today. Okay, so the surveys will be good, and the telling them up front. Sometimes the kids are having a bad day. Sometimes the child is acting out. If this starts happening, this is how you should react, or this is who you should take them to, or this is who you should go speak to, so that they know where to go. You can't control everything that happens, but at least try to prepare them for what they should do if something happens. And that's part of the training volunteers. And I really didn't even address that part. Volunteer management is such a huge thing, really. We could not possibly cover it all in an hour and a half. We couldn't cover it all if we met for a week for the rest of the month. I mean, met every week for the rest of the month. But that is one thing that I would add in there, in that training. Let them know up front. These are the possibilities, but if it happens, this is how you should respond. And our volunteers really did come back thinking, man, this is wonderful. None of that ugly stuff happened. None of those troubles or difficult situations happened. But for those who did face those things, they at least knew what to do and how to do it. Okay. All right. Another thing to engage your volunteers daily. What do you do when you get some volunteers? How do you put them to work? Do you check to see what they're good at? What their interest is? Yes. You have to. If you want them to stay a long time, if you want them to be repeat volunteers, you want to find out what it is they're really good at, or what it is they're really passionate about. And one of the really great things about the young people in college now, because I know a lot of our volunteers are in college because they have the time, they have the energy, and they still have the belief that, man, I can save the world. Okay, so we depend on a lot of students. But anything you need to do with a computer, with social media, they don't even have to think about it. They can do it in their sleep. While we're trying to figure it out, I don't even know what Instagram, Snapchat, all the stuff my kids are doing, like, I have no clue. But those things you need because they appeal to that age group that you're trying to get to come in and volunteer in many cases, not all cases. Because sometimes you need an older volunteer. But if you're trying to appeal to the younger volunteers, you're gonna need that kind of stuff. So one good way to keep volunteers engaged is to match them up, have them doing jobs that really apply to who they are, what they can do, what they're good at. Anybody can sweep the floor, but sometimes you might need that person who is an excellent speaker, who is gonna talk with your group, or who is gonna speak for your group, okay? So if you can, try to do those screenings. I mentioned earlier in creating a welcoming culture is make sure that you have sufficient resources to support what it is you want them to do, okay? If you're gonna have a whole boatload of volunteers come in, I mentioned Kathy Jean earlier, if she's got, a couple hundred people in there trying to get the books out, she doesn't want to be short of books, she doesn't want to be short of labels, she doesn't want to be short of boxes to put the books in to ship them. You want to make sure you have the materials that they're going to need. If they're going to create your website, you need to make certain that you have all the financial resources that you need. Okay? So make sure that they have the sufficient resources to do what you're asking them to do. Another thing is supervision and communication. Just like you would do with someone that you've hired to do a job, you want to give them feedback. Goes back to the thank you that Reverend Camphouse was speaking about. This is excellent. You did a really great job. I love the website that you developed. I love the Twitter account that you set up. We've had so much response. We've had an increase in the number of people coming in to serve in our agency. Whatever positive feedback you can give a volunteer, give that volunteer. If there is something, and heaven forbid, but if there's something that they're not doing well, you ever had a volunteer that didn't work out too well? I have. But anyway, if they haven't, then there's an art, but of it not as a, this was terrible, but approach it in a way of, okay, we did this, let's see how we can do it even better next time. Not that you were awful. This was terrible. But no, you wanna say, okay, yeah, this was a good learning experience, and let's see how we can make it better next time. What else can we do? Do you have any input on what we can do, how we can improve it? How would you improve it? What would you like to see? Okay, rather than saying, "Ooh, you did, that's something terrible. I don't know where you came from." But anyway, anybody had any, situations where you had to, help a volunteer perform better? I'll put it that way.
I got a question.
Yes.
Tying these things together, there got to be occasions where you run into volunteers who have their own agenda. They want to do something, they want to do what they want to do. And they've got a perception about that it's very needed, and they're off on that tangent. So you either have conflict in getting them assigned to something that is truly needed, that you need them to do, or then you've got the supervision and communications feedback. Well, they did it, but they didn't do it very well because they didn't want to do it to begin with. So how do you sort of tease that out to the beginning as part of your screening, and then how do you sort of connect those dots?
Wow, that's a great one, Ralph, and I've had that situation more times than I really even care to relive, where people have their own agenda, and they are doing, you know, I had one assistant, he was a volunteer, and not in our office, Ralph, but in another office. And he was doing all the stuff he wanted to do because he was trying to establish himself as a public relations specialist, and, you know, he was doing his own thing. But it is challenging because if you can, you want to salvage the volunteer relationship. Although sometimes you do get to a place where you say, okay, this really just isn't working out. But if you can, from the beginning, going back to that definition, that job description, this is what I need you to do, okay? And then your feedback with that person needs to reiterate, this is what I need you to do. If you can use your passion or your agenda in a way that is going to help accomplish these goals or these responsibilities, that is well. But otherwise, this is what I need you to do. Need to kind of stay on point. Yes.
Got almost 20 years of ministry experience.
Okay.
And so not always do you get to pick the volunteers.
True.
And usually the worst ones that I've had that fit that category are people I inherited before I got there, who already think that they know, do, and are better than whatever the idea is of me or others in the current now. And they do, most of them, if not all, I'm trying to think of an exception to the rule, I just hate to use the word all, but right now I can't think of an exception, are doing the things that they're doing with a genuineness to where they really think that they're helping, and yet they're bullying people into others, that like, part of it's personality, part of it's self-esteem, that they have a need to be important in those kinds of things, and some of them have jobs that are, one of the people, I'm not naming no names, but this is in California, one of the worst ones that I had a previous job as a person that worked for the transportation department in California, as the one who did the eminent domain stuff. So she was the one that said, we have taken your land and we are happy to relocate you. That was the person that was my ad board chair at one of the churches, and she had no qualms.
And she approached everything in that way?
And she had no qualms, that it was her way or no other way with whatever. And so this was a very, and yet, because everybody was kind of afraid of her, you just, I mean, we really just had to stand and take it. So, and in those kinds of situations where you're working with volunteers and they've already got all the things where they think it's supposed to be, trying to find an out to that is difficult and almost impossible when they've already got all the power and you don't. So, until you can establish the trust and the street cred and all the things that would then buoy you up, because the title alone is not enough.
Right. You're right, it can be very, very difficult. I, work with, or actually direct a nonprofit in Opelika, in the name of love. And one of the things we do is we feed people. I have a partnership with Campus Kitchens, Tada, since I'm their advisor, I partner with them too, right? But we feed people who need meals in the community that my church is in. There's great pockets of poverty around that church.
I
And
lift
people
you up,
come in
St.
to eat.
Luke and me.
Yes.
That's what I'm doing, is I'm lifting you up.
Oh, okay, okay.
Good Lord.
But when we, started serving people, I had some very, I shouldn't put it in past tense because I still have some very, very strong-willed women who were working with me. You ever work with a group of very strong-willed women?
Absolutely.
Anybody? They can do just about anything. We joke about, with one of the volunteers about, it seems like she's always telling everybody, okay, let's go move that mountain. Come on. Just that kind of strong personality. And she means she's moving that mountain and nothing's getting in the way. Anybody in the way between her and that mountain is getting run over. And she's literally running over you to get to that mountain. Okay. And then I have another lady who is an older lady, and she's in charge of the kitchen at our church for when we have a church function. Any of you know the lady in charge of the kitchen at your churches? Strong personalities? You do this, you do it right now, you hurry up. What do you mean coming in here without sleeves on? Go back and put on a t-shirt. Where's your St. Luke apron? The one I had embroidered? You don't have it on? Get back in there and do that. Well, I'm about to die. Go in there and get it anyway. Okay, so those are the strong people I'm dealing with, and they are used to not asking you to do something, but they're used to telling you to do something, and not necessarily with a smile.
That's right.
Okay, and so when I started serving people who are coming in downtrodden, my thing was I wanted to serve everybody with a smile and welcome you with the love of God, all right? That was my thing. Let's just smile, let's welcome everybody in. And in the first few weeks we served meals. What'd you do? Why'd you sit there and turn around and so fast? Who told you? Which number is this? You can't give him that much food. I'm like, wow, wait, whoa, what's going on in the room? Where's the love? Everybody smiled. And so it took consistency. But I would tell them, okay, everybody, we're gonna smile. Everybody take a deep breath. We're gonna show these people love. It's okay. We'll just put up a sign that says you can't have more than 3 plates for yourself. Who knew a person coming in on 10? Did you know that? But anyway, we're just gonna put up this nice sign and say the limit is, and we're gonna keep smiling and keep pressing. But it took a while. And those people, not necessarily that they even had their own agenda route, but they had their own method of doing things. And they were the ones who used to being in charge. And so they weren't necessarily used to me telling them this is how I want us to do this. They were the ones gathering everybody and sending out the orders. And they could probably prepare an army to fight any nation. I mean, there's that kind of personality in the building. I mean, I think they win just about anyone you want to put in. But I did have to say, this is different. Let's everybody take a step back. We're gonna smile and be pleasant. And so we finally got ourselves to that place. But it did take, it takes a special touch sometimes to work with volunteers. Because bottom line, like I said, we need them for what we're doing. But you do want to try and keep them on task. And you do have to watch out for agendas. And occasionally, last resort, but sometimes you have to say, this may not be the experience for you. Okay? Sometimes you have to say that. But I finally got my ladies to stop barking at people. They're used to barking orders, but I'm like, please, we're trying to show the love. All right. But we're created that culture, matching people to their skill set, giving them the resources, giving them a lot of feedback, and definitely recognizing their contributions. When I was in Project Uplift, we used to do a volunteer of the year. We gave them a plaque. We had a big meal where we invited all the volunteers and the board of directors from the Lee County Development Center, and we would just have those people recognized. We would put them in the newsletter. We would tell everybody about all of the things that they had done, and just a big thank you. We appreciate you. We can't do it without you. Okay? Because most of the volunteers, I say most because there were a few people we paid in Project Uplift, but most volunteers aren't getting paid, and even what they were getting paid was not enough for what they were doing. So we show them that appreciation. Right. Anybody have any great ways that they show appreciation to their volunteers? Want to share? No? So you just use them up and spit them out?
I periodically just put it on our Facebook page. We love our volunteers.
Yes.
Like Walmart gave us some pumpkins last week, and it took me a while to get that. I had to work a little bit for it, and they didn't just hand it over to me. So at the end, we all took a picture in front of Walmart, and we put it on our Facebook page, and they put it on their Facebook page, and because they like to be recognized for helping in the community. So I try to do that most every time, and just even throughout the year. Just
Right.
we love you, we need you,
Yes.
we appreciate you. And
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful example. Putting it on your Facebook page, putting it on Snapchat, putting it on Instagram, all of those kinds of things. Just, I'm amazed at how many times my kids can post that same picture of themselves. I'm like, really? It's the same picture, you have on a different outfit, it's a different day, same little shot you took yesterday. Okay, but if that's what's gonna appeal to them, post that picture over and over again. This is an awesome individual here, and put what they did. When I was with Project Uplift, I used to send out a letter to the local vendors in downtown Auburn and say, I have this great group of volunteers, they're doing some wonderful work. I wanna just be able to pull some names out of a hat and give some of them just a gift that says I appreciate you. Vendors were sending me shirts and jewelry and gift cards because they said we can appreciate that as well. So sometimes you think of some different ways to tell a person thank you. And sometimes it's very simple. Sometimes I used to call Chick-fil-A, order up a stack of chicken nuggets, and Lord knows Chick-fil-A is addictive, right? And at that time, they had the chocolate brownies with the nuts in it. Ooh, good God. And I used to order a tray of those, and I would send out a message, come by today and just have lunch with me. And they would come by and eat, and I loved it, because whatever was left over, I ate it like food was going out of style. But they would love it. They just stop by, and they would sit down in the conference room, and they just eat. And they'd share stories and laugh, and then a new set would come through, because everybody had lunch at slightly different times, and so I could sit down with another set, Elise, and eat again. That's what I did. But they loved it. And we would do it just periodically, a couple times a year, once each semester, just stop by and have lunch. So think of different ways that you can say to your volunteers, I thank you, I appreciate you. And I know you don't necessarily have a lot of money, but some things are free. Like posting is free. Okay, so give them that feedback, recognize their contributions. Every once in a while we used to print up some plaques. Now the plaques weren't free, but we did that just once a year. Okay, so engage them, tell them thank you, give them what they need. All right, and then the final area is leadership opportunities, training, professional development. If there are opportunities, like your staff has some training, that your volunteers can also attend, make it available to them. One thing they want, we already mentioned that one thing that some of them want is that experience. They want to be able to build their resume. If you can help them build their resume by giving them some training that is going to add value to their resume when they're out on a job search, give it to them. If you have those opportunities for training and professional development, make them a part of the team. That's another thing that's part of that welcoming culture, because it says you're not just somebody coming in here that I need to help sweep my floor. You are someone that we value enough to invest in. require training. Okay? So make those opportunities available. And if you make those opportunities available, you are increasing the possibility for that volunteer to stay with your agency over an extended amount of time. And if you can train them in some ways that's going to add value to your organization, it's a win-win. They are getting some training, they are learning more, it's added value to their resume, but then you're increasing their value to your organization because they can do some more things that your organization may very well be in need of, okay? So when you can have those opportunities to give them training and development, do so. Leadership opportunities within the organization. Make them the volunteer coordinator. Say, you've been with us so long, you've done such a good job, you're so passionate, I want you to be the smiling face that greets all of our volunteers. I want you to be the smiling face that shows them how to do what it is we need them to do. I want you to be the smiling face that they can come to if they have questions and they have concerns, they have problems. Okay? So let them become the leaders in your organization. Again, with Project Uplift, we had some volunteers who had been with us a while, and then we trained them to train volunteers. So once a person had come in and decided to work with an at-risk child, those volunteers that we selected as the leaders would go with them their first time they went to meet their child, would show them these are some things that you can do with your child, would give them a list of all of the different free activities so they wouldn't spend a lot of money, right? But we created those leadership positions within the organization that gave the volunteers an opportunity to move up and to develop and to feel even more needed and more appreciated. Say they need me, they appreciate me enough, they see something in me to give me a position of leadership. People will stay with you when they believe that you believe in them, okay? Expand their roles and possibilities. Again, that's really almost duplicating what I just said, but can you increase what they're doing? Can they now go beyond helping you stack the food in the pantry to actually speaking with people about donating food that they can then go stack in the pantry? So can you expand that role? Can you give them something more to do? And that's one way that I really kind of helped my ladies who were, I gave them a role. So one of them is in charge of desserts, and so every week she calls me excited, Joyce, I have 100 brownies. Thank you, sister. I'll be over there to pick them up. All right, and then I have another one, the one who's always moving the mountain. I let her mountain become that mountain of to-go plates at Sam's, okay? Did you move that mountain? Does that mountain have some to-go plates in it? Expand the role. Okay, give them more to do. Give them more responsibilities. If you see that they are a volunteer who is consistent, who continues to come, okay? And again, the more you can get them in there and keep them in there, that's one less person you gotta go back and train, because Lord knows you don't have the time to keep on training, right?
Are we gonna talk about being conscientious and not burning them out at the same time?
I was, but do you want me to?
Sure. Because, I mean, I've given people, given, and then
Right.
I had a call that said, I'm
done.
tired.
Yes, yes,
You know,
yes.
so-
And I don't mean to be facetious, but no, that wasn't on my, list, but it is a very good one. Because you can lose people when they're too tired. I will be honest, we've had some people, and I keep going back to Project Uplift, but I worked with them 10 years.
Yeah.
And we did have some people say, okay, I need to take a step back.
Yeah.
I've spent too much time with my child. I'm worn out. Can I, as a matter of fact, we had one lady, and she was an older volunteer. And most of our volunteers were students, but she was a retiree. So those were our two pockets. They were either students at Auburn University at the time, or people who had retired. And she was a retiree, and she was a wonderful volunteer. But she did come to us at one point and say, okay, I need a break from being with my child every week for 3 hours a week. Because we would tell them every week for 3 hours a week for a full year. Because we want you to develop a relationship that was going to have an impact on that child. And And so she came to us with that, and we said, well, rather than seeing your child every week, 3 hours a week, will you help us, place the new volunteers? And that is, periodics is not an everyday thing. And so she did that. But that is one of the things that with the communication and feedback, and even as Sharon said, even with surveys, you can start finding out, am I asking too much? And that's really, I shouldn't laugh at all, but that is one thing that, particularly if you give a person too much too soon, you can completely drive them away. I had that conversation actually at church yesterday. So you do want to be aware of that, not to try to give people
And the
too
other thing
much.
is to be aware of people's changes in their lives. Like, my mom just has cancer now, or, and that even if they want to continue to do the same things they've been doing, to be gracious enough and wise enough to help them to step back before they are forced to step back.
Right.
Because if they're forced to step back,
Mhm.
you may lose them entirely, but if you understand the situation and work with them in it, then you may not lose them entirely,
Right.
because if you're like, okay, I'm ready now, thank you
Right.
for understanding.
Right. Say, I see that this is going on, so
Yeah.
let me take a little bit of something off of
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a very good, good advice, yes. And it is something critical, particularly, for people who've been with you for a while, that you may have moved up in leadership roles. Yes, sir.
Is there a life cycle to volunteerism? I mean, here, it's obvious that you're gonna have students for 2 to 3 or so years, and then they're gonna graduate and go away. Some come back.
Right. So when you
I
talk
came
about
back.
Lisa's gone, no.
I mean, I came back, but generally, do you see that, or is it more typical to?
There is a life cycle. And you tend to see it more so with the younger volunteers than the older volunteers. Because at least with my experiences, the older volunteers already have a very established, these are my parameters. I'm gonna do this for this period of time, and then that's what I'm gonna do, okay? And so they can, like Reverend Camphouse said, if you're not careful, they can take to the grave room. Cause they say, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do it these days, and I'm gonna, I'll let you know when I'm gonna stop. But with the students, I have definitely found that there is a life cycle. And with Project Uplift, our life cycle was about 18 months. That student, if you got them in, got them trained, got them convinced, sold them on, working with with their at-risk children for 3 hours a week, about 18 months was the average. There were a few who would stay longer, and there were some who would do their 12 months period and say, I'm done. But on average, it was about 18 months. And I will say, let me add to that, I think it also depends on the organization and how intense your involvement is. It's easier to stay longer if your involvement is not as intense. If I'm not requiring as much of you, then it's easier to stay a little bit longer. So some people, their volunteers may stay a lot longer than that. And then there are others who may stay a lot less because what you're asking is so intense.
But, second part of that, then you sort of know inherently that there's gonna be a succession rotation that, like your example of the 18 months, that you could be having as many as a third of the volunteers roll off
Right.
in any given year.
Oh, absolutely.
And you've just got to always be planning to fill that void.
Yeah, and how we handled it in Project Uplift is we had a constant, we never had an off season. We were always doing trainings, we were always doing screenings, we were always taking in new volunteers. Every semester, spring, winter, even summer, we went through those trainings and brought in new volunteers because they were constantly rotating out. And it could be a very intense kind of situation. If you have a child who was really struggling, because some of the volunteers were all in. They would go to school with the kids, go have lunch with them sometimes, help them out with their homework, bring them on campus and tell them, have you ever considered going to college kind of thing, which is what we wanted. But it could wear you out too. So a lot of them did do about 12 to 18 months.
And last question.
And I'm gonna charge you for the next
I
one.
appreciate it.
But,
Big event volunteerism versus regular volunteerism. Like the campus kitchens, there's a big amount of work, but it's steady and it's week to week, you know that you've got this going. Whereas other organizations would have like, and I know from doing it, back at home with my wife, the Cancer Society would have a big annual fundraiser, and be everybody. So your recruiting strategy for one versus another.
right, those recruiting strategies are totally different. Because what I'm talking about today is more about, investing in people over a long term.
Right.
But for those people where you need a large number of people for a very limited time, you know, I always say cast a broad net. You just wanna get as many bodies in there as possible. Like for the, you mentioned the, big event. They just want students, you don't have to have any particular skill, you just gotta be willing and able to go out there, paint a house, sweep a floor, clean the yard. Not, you know, nothing against people who do that for a living, but the students, if they're looking to do that, they're not looking to see, can you teach computer science, or can you tutor a math student? They just need some bodies. And so with those, when you're looking for a large number of students or a large number of volunteers for a specific time, it helps to target a group. Like if you need a whole lot of students, you might go to this fraternity and say, can you all help? Can you provide people for this particular event? Or go to that social group, civic group in your community. One group that I found to be very good when you need a lot of people is, I started going to the honor society at the high school. You know, all those kids need honors, and they got a lot of energy. Now, you're not gonna get them to do a whole lot of in-depth things, but they'll do something if you need a bunch of warm bodies for one day, okay? And they need those hours, and all you gotta do is sign off, but you can get a whole stack of them. Okay, so the recruiting for that is a little bit different. But that's a good point. All right, we've provided training, we provide leadership opportunities, we've expanded roles, kind of going with that, give them the title that reflects the expanded roles. But I will say that with a lot of the young people today, they're not particularly interested in your titles. But you know, some older people like me, we love a good title, and so, you know, you might want to give me a title to go with my new role, head trash collector or whatever. All right, and then the last thing I had on here on leadership opportunities is if there's opportunities for employment. Best of all possible worlds. You've had a volunteer who volunteered with your agency. You've invested your training and your energy and your time. They know about your organization. They know how to do all those things you've taught them to do over an extended period of time, and there's a job opening. Wow, it doesn't get any better than that, right? Unless they're one of those people that you're trying to see how to get rid of them. But otherwise, if there are opportunities for employment, make them aware of it, at least. Let them be the first ones who get the opportunity to apply. Tell them about it up front. This position is going to come open. You know, let them know about it. They would appreciate it. And you'll get someone that you've already trained. There's not much worse than training somebody for a year and then having to start fresh training a new body for the year. So if there are opportunities for them to get employment, that would be a win for everyone.
Or also, I've done a letter of recommendation
Oh,
for some of
absolutely.
mine. And I will say that they really appreciate that, cause some of them that volunteer in a whole different field, you know, they've come to volunteer. I had a young lady in marketing and she wanted to work for the news station, so nice letter of recommendation, and she was really happy with that.
Oh, absolutely. We did so many. I love Jane. She just hold up that sign with no expression on her face, like, okay, Joyce, We heard enough. Okay, I got you, Danielle. But yes, with, Sharon was talking about the letters of recommendation, and again, with Project Uplift, we wrote letters of recommendation almost like we were in a print shop. I mean, we were selling, because we had 300 plus volunteers per year. At least at the time I was there. The numbers are not quite that now, but it's still a substantial amount. But we did write a lot of letters of recommendation. And so when you can do that for someone who volunteered for you, that too is a really good opportunity. All right. As I said, that is Volunteer Management Part 1. And there are so many different things that we didn't get an opportunity to talk about, but there's only so much your brain is going to soak in at one sitting. And so I don't want to press my luck and try to give you too much more. But are there any questions or comments or any experiences that anybody wants to share?
I'd like to say that our foster grandparents are long-term, dedicated. We've had some for, I can't even begin to tell you how many years.
Oh, yes.
And that's a good example of what you're talking about today, is our foster grandparents.
Absolutely. And again, I go back to Project Uplift, but some of the best volunteers, the most long-term volunteers that I had when I was there were retirees who were looking for something to do. They were looking for the opportunity to give back. They still had great energy, they had great knowledge, they had a lot to pour into to those kids who needed a mentor. And so the retirees, that is a group that's a very rich pool of people to tap into. They are awesome. And like Sharon, there was one volunteer with Project Uplift. She was there for about 10 years. And nothing short of death got her out of Project Uplift. Yeah, she was awesome. She went through 5 different young ladies that she mentored. They cycled out of the program, and then she'd come back and pick another one. So, yes, good comment. Any other questions, comments?
When we do our, like volunteer appreciation kind of thing, I try to do the employee of the month program, and they, you know, it's just to be recognized when they always come in, I catch them, get a picture of them with their favorite animal, and, you know, tell about how long they've been there and that kind of thing. Everybody likes that.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
We're dirt poor.
That's wonderful. But that is wonderful. And then you can also use those pictures of that story of Volunteer of the Year as part of your recruitment.
Anytime we have events, because we couldn't do our events if we didn't have volunteers.
Right.
And it's all about adoption of our pets, and we have so many. Anybody need one? We're overstuff.com. We're doing a study right now, so y'all just come see us if you need a little fur face for your home, or your neighbor's home, or anybody's home, really. We're kind of like, you know, I tell them, I said, look, are you gonna have? I said, look, we're like TJ Maxx. We never know what we're gonna have. So keep on coming. But we also have a volunteer page on Facebook. We have every kind of social media we can, you know, volunteers and fosters and our regular, and we have Twitter, and Trump ain't got nothing on us. We have we should not. And we have Instagram and Snapchat. We have it all. But we try to put, you know, like post pictures from our events with them all snuggling up with the dog, and then tell how many, you know, how many adoptions, just so people know it's not just coming to the shelter and helping us clean, right, which is a huge job, or just, you know, walking dogs that day or something, you know. And they, you know, it's hard to get them in because so many of them think it's just about snuggling with cats and dogs, and it's not a Hello Kitty unicorn, you know, kind of place. I mean,
Right. There are endless opportunities of things that they do at that event.
Exactly.
Right? Yes.
And we have a lot of special projects that we'll, you know, get interested in. We've got Meals on Wheels that we're doing, feeding the dogs and the cats. That's the clients that they have for Meals on Wheels. And we take in a lot of food. A lot of people donate food to us that we have a specific diet for our animals.
Right.
While they're there, from birth, you know, till when they leave us. Not euthanasia or anything, but we go to homes and we always recommend what kind of food. But we, you know, a lot of people donate, and Walmart donates bags that have like busted open, you know, that they can't sell.
Right.
But we can't use that because it'll mess up their stomachs,
Right.
and so we donate it to the food bank. so we, you know, we give, we continue to give, and things
That's
that,
wonderful.
you know, so.
But I will say with the Lee County Humane Society, is you do have an upper hand on a lot of people looking for volunteers. Because a lot of people will respond to that picture of a person petting an animal before they will respond to some of the other things.
Yeah.
They will respond to that and someone with a child more quickly than they will respond to most other things. But I do realize you all have a number of different jobs and volunteer opportunities.
And I do training every month, two trainings a month. So we have over 300 volunteers, but keeping them engaged, you know,
Right.
they'll kind, and I'll tell them, I said, you know, I've always never been attacking. And I try to solve that, you know, with, I don't need quantity, I need quality.
Right.
You know, because a lot of them are college students, and they're looking to pad their resume.
Right.
You know, and I'm, you know, you wanna be able to know that when you put that on your resume, that you came and you gave your time.
Right.
And it's been, you know, you'll know when you leave there, because it is, you know you've made a difference in the dog and cat's life.
Right.
Even if just for a couple hours a month, it really does, while you're there. Because we have so many animals that can be stuck in their kennel for 23.5 hours a day,
Right.
you know, so they need that socialization.
Yes, yes. And I will say, and I see them in the kitchen just a second. And I will say that, what I was talking about today is more like in line with what you were talking about. Not just some warm bodies, but that sustained relationship. Yeah, cause some, you know, both, there's a need for both at different times, but, this was more about the sustained relationships.
The other thing that's just helpful for everybody, particularly those of us that are in nonprofits of different kinds, religious and non, is to be aware of the other nonprofits.
Oh,
that when
absolutely.
you,
Yes.
and what they do, so that when you meet people, not everybody's gonna fit everything.
Absolutely.
But everybody has gifts and abilities and wants at different parts of their life to give back, to do something for others. So the more that you can educate yourself about what the opportunities are to give back in your community, the more we all help each other and the more good gets done in a hurting world.
Right,
So
right.
that's also another volunteer resource, is just saying, you know, I don't do dogs and cats really, but I know someone who does. You know, and to be that person to connect people.
Yes, yes. And one thing that we have found from doing the volunteer fairs and the volunteer trainings is that it has allowed, and we weren't smart enough to think of it from the beginning, but it has been a great tool for, organizations to get to know,
Yeah.
okay, you do what? You do who? You what? Oh, we can make some connections here. So that is one thing that we found out just, you know, sheer by accident. You know, Ralph and all his bringers didn't foresee it, and it didn't even enter my mind when we started doing it. But it was one of the things that the agency started telling us, oh man, I love coming to volunteer fair. I meet so many different organizations.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I thought you get kids. Well, yeah, we got kiddos too. But anyway, I do want you to remember though, when it comes to working with your volunteers, what I said from the beginning is people are not inspired by the facts and the statistics. They are inspired by the possibilities. The possibilities that they can make a difference to the clientele that you're serving. Okay. So appeal to those possibilities. That's what's gonna make them wanna come to your organization. Thank you all so much for your time today. If you didn't get anything, please get some sandwiches, even to go, and take them to a coworker or a friend or an enemy. And make